My name is Rachel. I am 32 years old, and I work as a kindergarten teacher at a small public school in Ohio. 2 weeks ago, I flew to Charleston, South Carolina, for my older brother's engagement party. His fiancée, Vanessa, comes from a very wealthy family. Old money, big house on the Battery, the kind of people who summer in Nantucket and never talk about how much anything costs because they never have to. When I walked into the restaurant that night, Vanessa's mother looked me up and down, smiled politely, and said to the table, "And this is Tyler's little sister. She teaches kindergarten." Then she paused just long enough for everyone to register what she meant. Isn't that sweet? A few of her friends chuckled softly. I didn't say anything, I just smiled and found my seat. But across the table, an older woman I had never seen before suddenly looked up from her wine glass and stared at me. Her eyes narrowed, not in a mean way, but like she was trying to place my face. She tilted her head slightly, opened her mouth, then closed it again. And for the rest of the appetizer course, she kept glancing at me like a word stuck on the tip of her tongue. Before I tell you what she remembered, please like and subscribe to Heartway Stories and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a small town outside of Columbus. My parents divorced when I was 11, and my dad remarried pretty quickly. His new wife, Barbara, was kind enough, but she had 2 kids of her own, and our house suddenly felt very crowded. My brother Tyler was 3 years older than me, and he handled the transition better than I did. He was charming, athletic, good at making people like him. By the time he got to college, he had a football scholarship and a future that everyone kept calling bright. I was different. I was quiet. I liked reading, drawing, and spending time with little kids. When my cousins came over for holidays, I was always the one sitting on the floor with the toddlers, building towers out of blocks or making up stories with stuffed animals. My grandmother used to say I had a gift for making children feel safe. I didn't think much about it back then, but looking back, I think she was the first person who ever told me what I was supposed to do with my life. After high school, I went to a small state university and studied early childhood education. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody was impressed at parties when I said I was going to be a kindergarten teacher. People would nod politely and then ask my brother what position he played. But I loved it. From my very first day of student teaching, I knew this was exactly where I belonged. There's a moment that happens almost every school year that reminds me why I chose this path. It usually comes in the first few weeks. A child walks through the classroom door on the first day, terrified, clinging to a parent's leg, sometimes crying so hard they can barely breathe. And over the next few days and weeks, something shifts. They start to trust you. They let go of the door frame. They sit down at the little table and pick up a crayon. And one morning, they walk in by themselves, look up at you, and smile. That moment, that tiny, quiet shift from fear to trust, that's everything to me. That's why I teach. But not everyone sees it that way. Especially not Vanessa. Tyler met Vanessa 3 years ago at a charity gala in Charleston. She was a junior partner at a corporate law firm, beautiful, ambitious, and very aware of how the world worked. She came from the kind of family that measured people by what they earned, what they drove, and where they vacationed. Tyler had done well for himself after college. He went into finance, moved to Charlotte, and eventually landed a position that paid more money than anyone in our family had ever seen. So when he brought Vanessa home for Thanksgiving the first time, she looked around our modest house with a polite smile and said almost nothing. Over the next 2 years, I watched my brother slowly change. He started wearing different clothes, talking about different things. He stopped calling me on weekends. When I texted him funny pictures of my students' art projects, he'd reply with a thumbs up emoji and nothing else. I told myself he was just busy, that this was what happened when people grew up and moved on. But part of me knew the truth. Vanessa didn't think I was worth his time, and slowly, Tyler was starting to agree. When the engagement party invitation arrived, I almost didn't go. It was being held at a private dining room inside one of the nicest restaurants in Charleston. The invitation itself was printed on heavy cream paper with gold lettering. Just holding it made me feel out of place. But Tyler called me, one of the few times he'd called in months, and asked me to come. "I want you there, Rach," he said. "You're my sister." So I went. I packed my best dress, which was a simple navy blue one I had bought for a coworker's wedding 2 years earlier. I did my hair and makeup in the hotel bathroom, and when I looked in the mirror, I thought I looked fine. Not flashy, but put together. Comfortable. Like myself. The restaurant was exactly what I expected. Dark wood, white tablecloths, candles on every surface, and soft music playing from somewhere I couldn't see. When I walked in, I immediately noticed 2 things. First, everyone in the room looked like they had walked out of a magazine. The women wore designer dresses and real jewelry. The men had tailored suits and expensive watches. Second, I was the only person there who looked like a kindergarten teacher from Ohio. And somehow, everyone seemed to know it. I found Tyler near the bar. He looked handsome and a little nervous. He gave me a quick hug and introduced me to a few people before Vanessa appeared and pulled him away to greet someone more important. I drifted toward the tables. The seating arrangement put me at the far end of a long table, next to an elderly couple I didn't know and across from a woman who turned out to be Vanessa's college roommate. She was nice enough, but spent most of the evening talking about her renovation project in the Hamptons. About 30 minutes into the dinner, after the salads were cleared and the main course was being served, Vanessa's mother stood up. Her name was Catherine. She was tall, slim, and had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. She tapped her glass with a dessert spoon, and the room went quiet. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said. "We are so thrilled to welcome Tyler into our family." She smiled at my brother, and he smiled back. Then she began introducing family members on both sides. When she got to Tyler's side, she pointed toward our mother and stepfather. Tyler's mother, Linda, and her husband, Gary. They came all the way from Ohio. A polite round of applause. Then her eyes found me. "And this is Tyler's little sister." She paused. "She teaches kindergarten." She let the word hang there, the same way you'd say someone collects bottle caps or talks to pigeons. A few of Vanessa's friends exchanged amused glances. One woman leaned toward another and whispered something that made them both smirk. "Isn't that sweet?" Catherine finished. Then she moved on to Vanessa's cousins, a surgeon and an investment banker, and her voice became noticeably warmer. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my face neutral. I had dealt with this before. People who don't understand what teaching really is always react the same way. To them, it's just finger painting and snack time. They don't see the child who comes to school hungry because there's no food at home. They don't see the kid who flinches when you raise your hand because someone at home hits them. They don't see the parent who sobs in your classroom doorway because you were the first adult to notice their child couldn't read. They don't see any of that. They just see crayons and glue sticks and think it's sweet. So I smiled, the way I always do, and turned my attention back to my plate. But that's when I noticed the woman across the table. She was sitting about 4 seats to my left, directly across from Vanessa's uncle. She looked to be in her early 60s, with short silver hair and sharp cheekbones. She wore a simple black dress and a single strand of pearls. Compared to the other women in the room, she looked almost understated. But there was something about her presence, something calm and steady, that made her stand out anyway. And she was staring at me. Not the way Vanessa's friends had stared, with pity or amusement. This was different. She was looking at me the way you look at a word in a crossword puzzle that you know, but can't quite reach. I looked away, thinking maybe I was imagining it. But a few minutes later, I glanced back, and she was still watching me. She had stopped eating. Her fork rested on the edge of her plate, and her fingers were lightly touching her chin. Then she leaned slightly toward the man beside her, who I later learned was her husband, and said something quietly. He looked at me for a second, shrugged, and went back to his steak. The dinner continued. Wine was poured, plates were cleared, and conversation floated around the table in waves. Someone brought up politics, and the man next to me quickly changed the subject to golf. The elderly couple on my other side told me about their grandchildren, and for a few minutes, I relaxed. Then Vanessa stood up again. She had been drinking champagne steadily throughout the evening, and her cheeks were flushed. She held her glass high and looked around the room. "I just want to say how lucky I am," she said. "I have the most amazing friends, the most supportive family, and now," she looked at Tyler, "the most perfect fiancé." Everyone clapped. Tyler looked proud and a little embarrassed. Then Vanessa continued. "And I've been getting to know Tyler's family too." She turned toward our mother. "Linda is such a dear. And Gary is so handy around the house." More polite laughter. Then she looked at me. "And Rachel." She paused, tilting her head with a practiced smile. "Rachel is so devoted to her little job. She teaches 5-year-olds how to tie their shoes." The table laughed. She raised her glass. "To finding happiness in the simple things." I don't know if she meant it to sting as much as it did. Maybe in her world, it was just a joke, but I felt it land in my chest like a stone. The laughter echoed around me, and for a moment, I considered standing up and leaving. But I didn't. I just sat there, the way I always do, quiet and still. And then I heard a voice from across the table. "Excuse me." It was the silver-haired woman. She wasn't loud, but something in her tone made the people near her stop talking. She was looking directly at me again, and now there was something new in her expression. Not curiosity anymore. Recognition. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice calm and clear. "But I need to ask you something." The table around us grew quieter. Vanessa lowered her glass slightly. Tyler looked confused. The woman leaned forward. "What school do you teach at?" I blinked. "Westbrook Elementary," I said, "in Columbus." The woman's hand went to her mouth. She pressed her fingers against her lips and closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, they were wet. Her husband put a hand on her arm. "Margaret, are you all right?" She didn't answer him. She just kept looking at me, and now her chin was trembling. "You probably don't remember me," she said softly. "But 6 years ago, you had a little boy in your class named Oliver." My heart stopped. Oliver. I remembered Oliver. Of course I remembered Oliver. You don't forget a child like that. Oliver came to my class at the beginning of the school year. He was 5 years old, small for his age, with dark hair and enormous brown eyes. He almost never spoke. While the other kids played and laughed and fought over toys, Oliver would sit by himself in the corner, drawing the same picture over and over. A house with no door. A sky with no sun. A stick figure standing alone at the bottom of the page. At first, I thought he was just shy. Some kids take longer to warm up. But after 2 weeks, I noticed other things. He flinched when I touched his shoulder. He never ate his lunch, even though his lunchbox was always packed. And whenever the classroom got loud, he would cover his ears and curl into himself like he was trying to disappear. I started keeping notes. I talked to the school counselor. I requested a meeting with his parents, but only his father showed up, and he was dismissive. He said Oliver was fine, just quiet, and that I should focus on teaching and not playing psychologist. But I couldn't let it go. Something was wrong with this child, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to pay attention. One afternoon, during nap time, I knelt beside Oliver and asked him about his drawing. He had drawn the house again. No door, no sun. "Oliver," I said gently, "can you tell me about your picture?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, in a voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear it, he said, "That's my room. There's no way out." I felt the floor drop out from under me. I went to the principal that afternoon. I called Child Protective Services the next morning. Over the following weeks, I documented everything. Every bruise that appeared on a Monday morning. Every time Oliver said something that didn't make sense until it suddenly made terrible sense. Every drawing that told a story no 5-year-old should know how to tell. The investigation took months. There were interviews, home visits, legal proceedings. Oliver's father denied everything. There were moments when I thought nothing would change, that the system would fail this child the way it fails so many others. But I kept pushing. I testified at the hearing. I showed every drawing, every note, every piece of evidence I had collected. And eventually, Oliver was removed from that home. It was one of the hardest things I have ever been through. I couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. I kept wondering if I had done enough, if I had acted fast enough, if the damage was already too deep. But here, in this restaurant in Charleston, 6 years later, the woman across the table from me was crying. "Oliver is my grandson," she said. The entire table had gone silent now. Every person in that room was watching her. She took a shaky breath and continued. "After he was removed from his father's care, his mother, my daughter, got full custody. She moved back home to be near us. We got Oliver into therapy. It took time. A lot of time. But he started to heal." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He's 11 now," she said. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes with tears. "He plays soccer. He has friends. Last month, he told me he wants to be an artist someday." She paused. "He still draws houses, but now they have doors. And windows. And a sun in the corner." I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. I pressed my hand against my chest and tried to keep my composure, but the tears came anyway. Margaret looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was gratitude so deep it looked almost like pain. "You were the only one who saw him," she said. "His teachers before you missed it. His pediatrician missed it. His neighbors missed it. But you saw him. You saw a little boy who was invisible to everyone else, and you refused to look away." The room was completely still. I could hear the candles flickering. Then Margaret turned slowly toward Vanessa. "You said she teaches children how to tie their shoes," Margaret said. Her voice was steady now, and it carried across the table like the toll of a bell. "But what she actually does is save their lives." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Vanessa's face had lost all color. Her champagne glass was still in her hand, but she had forgotten about it. Catherine, her mother, was staring at the tablecloth like she wished it would swallow her. Margaret wasn't finished. "My grandson is alive and safe today because of this woman. She is the reason he gets to grow up. She is the reason he laughs and plays and draws suns in his pictures." She looked around the table, making eye contact with every person who had smirked or chuckled earlier. "So I need everyone in this room to understand something. There is no such thing as just a teacher." The silence held for what felt like a full minute. Then Margaret's husband stood up from his chair. He walked around the table, stopped in front of me, and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said. His voice was thick with emotion. "For everything you did for our family." I shook his hand, but I could barely see through my tears. "I just did what any teacher would do," I whispered. Margaret shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "That's not true. Many people could have done what you did. But you were the only one who actually did it." From the corner of my eye, I saw Tyler. He was staring at me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were kids. It was the way he used to look at me when I'd stay up late helping him with his homework, or when I'd make sandwiches for both of us because our parents were too busy fighting to cook dinner. Like he was remembering who I was before the world told him I wasn't impressive enough. He stood up from his chair, walked over to me, and put his arms around me. "I'm sorry, Rach," he said quietly, close to my ear. "I'm so sorry." I hugged him back. And for a moment, we were kids again, standing in our kitchen while the world fell apart around us, holding on to the only thing that made sense. When he pulled away, he turned toward Vanessa. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The look on his face said everything. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I had known her, she had absolutely nothing to say. The rest of the evening passed quietly. People returned to their conversations, but the energy in the room had changed. Several guests came over to me individually. One woman, who turned out to be a pediatrician, squeezed my hand and said, "I have enormous respect for what you do." An older man told me his wife had been an elementary school teacher for 30 years and that it was the most important job in the world. Even Catherine managed to walk past me and murmur something that might have been an apology, though she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Margaret and I exchanged phone numbers before the evening ended. She showed me a photo on her phone of Oliver. He was standing in a backyard, holding a soccer ball, grinning at the camera. He looked like a completely different child from the silent little boy I remembered. "He asks about you sometimes," Margaret told me. "He calls you the nice teacher who listened." I cried again in the hotel room that night, not from sadness, but from something I don't quite have a word for. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. The knowledge that something I did years ago, something that kept me awake at night and made me question myself 100 times, had actually mattered. The next morning, I flew back to Ohio. When I walked into my classroom on Monday, 23 5-year-olds were waiting for me. One of them, a little girl named Mia, who had just started school the month before, ran up to me and hugged my legs. "I missed you, Miss Rachel," she said. I picked her up and held her close. "I missed you too, sweetheart." And I thought about Oliver, and about Margaret, and about every person who has ever looked at my job and seen something small. I thought about Vanessa and Catherine and every polite chuckle I've ever swallowed. And I realized something that I think I've always known but never said out loud. The work I do is not glamorous. It will never make me rich. I will never be the most impressive person at any dinner party. But every single day, I walk into a room full of children who are just beginning to figure out what the world is, and I get to help shape what they believe about it. I get to be the person who notices when something is wrong. I get to be the adult who kneels down to their level and says, "I see you. You matter. You are not invisible." And if that's just teaching, then just teaching is enough. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do in this world is pay attention to a child who has stopped talking, and sometimes the people who save lives don't wear scrubs or carry badges. Sometimes they carry crayons. And sometimes, years later, in a fancy restaurant where nobody expects it, the truth finds its way to the surface. Not because you fought for recognition. Not because you demanded respect, but because somewhere out there, a little boy is drawing suns in the corner of his pictures. And that is worth more than anything.